Welcome everybody to a small card making workshop presented by Lola. And with Mother's Day and Father's Day coming up soon, we thought it might be a nice opportunity to show you a variety of ideas for making one's own cards for any special occasion. So the cards that I'll be showing you today can be adapted for many different kinds of occasions. Um, I've been making cards, my own cards, really forever. It provides me with time to think about the person that I'm making the card for. I spend all of that time a little bit connected with that person, and it's meaningful for me and really satisfying. So hopefully the recipients are also enjoying it. But as far as we can all tell, most everybody's pretty happy to get some old-fashioned mail in the mailbox. So today we're going to show you a variety of ideas. And to begin with, as the progression of this little workshop goes on, we're going to begin doing a little bit of ink and watercolor work on paper first. And then we're going to be doing a few cards that have a little more dimension to them. They might be a pop-up card, might have some sewing involved, some ironing involved. And then finally, we will show you how to take those pieces and turn them into the greeting card that's nice and crisp and flat and sturdy. And then also show you a simple way to make envelopes to mail your cards in, since your cards may not fit into a standard envelope. So why don't we get started with all of that now? Robert is my filming assistant, and so maybe Robert, you could just take a pan over the table here and see the ideas, some of the ideas that we have going on. So there you can see there's an assortment of cards here that we'll be talking about one by one pretty much. And there are some materials out here, pens, watercolors, a needle for sewing something together, and thread. Um, Cardstock is important. I like using watercolor paper for my watercolor painting. I mean, it's not imperative. You can put watercolor on other papers, but they will warp more, and it's a little bit harder to work with, certainly. Though by adding the pen work to it, the line work, it does clarify and define it, even if it's on a poor quality paper. So some of this work requires some resourcefulness, and just go ahead and use what you have or obtain something else if that's a possibility for you.
Okay.
All right, we'll continue on now. I have this one card that I'm about to mail off to my friend, and over the last few days, I decided to paint this card, draw and paint it. My friend Cindy, who's a long ago friend from high school, her mom recently died at the age of 98 years old. And when Cindy was telling me some stories of her mom, she recollected a time recently when they were at her mom's retirement home, and they were sitting on a couch together, sharing gumdrops and laughing and having a great time. And so I made a mental image to myself at that moment and thought, oh, that would be a fun card to make for her to remember that experience that she had. So I did this very simple card. You can see how simple the people are. The couch is very simple. I added a little bit of text to which explains the situation. And anyway, I look forward to mailing this to her very soon. So next, I want to show you this Happy Mother's Day card, which could be a Happy Father's Day card too. And maybe for a father, rather than having a mother flower with all of the children flowers, maybe there would be a father fish swimming with small baby fish behind him. And in this little picture, I might write on the stems the name of each child just to make it a little bit clearer. And that's one thing you can do. You can use your text to clarify things and take away some of the pressure, since none of these flowers actually look like a Robert, a Kathy, a Patsy. I can just label them, and then Robert's mom will know who the children are. So I'm going to now just do a little bit of watercolor. Well, I'll show you a couple others too that are simply line drawings with ink and watercolor. Just simple little drawing with a little bit of color added. So I'm going to grab a piece of watercolor paper here and draw the mother flower on this page. So I'm going to use a Micron pen, which is a waterproof ink. If you use a pen that has water-soluble ink in it, when you touch it with the watercolor, the ink will bleed, which can also be an interesting effect. And sometimes one might deliberately want that to happen. But for this time, I want it to be waterproof. There are other waterproof pens you can buy at the store too. This is a Micron you would have to buy at a art supply store or something like that. But you can buy at just any general store a Uniball pen, and they work really well for this also. So I'll start drawing the mother flower here, drawing the center of the flower. I like to go straight in with ink. I think it gives it a liveliness, sometimes a little bit of irregularity, which can be charming. So I don't mind. If you feel super uncomfortable with that, you can use a pencil and then go over your pencil with pen lines and then erase the pencil before you paint. It's so interesting. You can paint over pencil lines and then when it's dry, erase the lines. And in most cases, the pencil erases, but it will not erase under yellow, the color yellow, which is a curious thing, and I don't really know why that is. So anyway, here we go. Oh, I better put a little face on this little lady. There we go. And I'm just painting this one so that you can get a little sense of how I do. I'm going to spray a little water on my paint. This is a palette that came as just an empty palette, and then I put the colors that I wanted in here from tube watercolor paints. So there we go. I have a little too much on there. I need to get myself a paper towel so I don't have to wipe it on my pants, but that's what I often do, end up wiping on my pants or my shirt or something like that. I think my filming assistant is bringing me a paper towel now, which will be helpful. So there we go. So I've cleaned my brush. I think well, no, I'll just go ahead and paint these petals a nice little, ooh, kind of a lot of water on there. Now, I do have the center of my flower is still wet. So if I touch the center, I'm going to have some bleeding coming out, a bleeding of the yellow and the red together, which won't bother me too much, but I'm going to try and avoid it a little right now. And I have so much paint on that first petal, I'm able to just keep picking it up and filling all the petals with a nice little pink color. And then while everything's still wet, I could come in and drop another tiny bit of maybe this magenta in there and see what happens. I think what I will do is rinse my brush, dry it off, and then soften the edges of these little dots so they aren't just whole or spots. I just would rather the color mingled a little bit more, so I'm going to encourage it along. Now to do the leaves, I'm going to do something a little different. I did mix the colors right there on the petals of the flower. This time I'm not putting any color down first, just water on the leaves. So I could also mix up a green. I don't usually have very many greens in my palette, though I do happen to have a green in this one that I sometimes use, but I never use it straight. I usually mix something else in with it to change it a little, maybe a little blue, maybe a little yellow, or a little burnt sienna, just to soften it down a little, not be quite such a bright, harsh green. So what I'm going to do this time is mix the green right on the paper. So I'm going to use a color that I have in my palette called quinacridone gold. You could use any yellow. And I'm just going to lay a little of that down in the water of the leaf. And then I'm going to take a blue and drop a little blue in there, and it will become green. Now, as I said, I used tube paints to fill my palette, but you can get, I really recommend Prang watercolors. They're inexpensive, generally used for children, but they are super paints. They are soft, they have vibrant, beautiful colors, and you can mix them to get a range of beautiful grays and browns, and you don't have to just use them straight out of the pan. In fact, the colors generally are more interesting if you do a little mixing rather than use them straight from the pan. But you can buy a set of those for maybe $4. I would not advise that you ever buy the dollar store dollar watercolors. They tend to be very hard and not vibrant or beautiful. So there is this. Now this itself, just this, could make a really nice little greeting card for somebody. So I could crop that right out of there. I could add a little bit of some grass down below. I could turn just this little flower into something also. And turn that into a card. Now, a little bit later on in the workshop, I'll be showing you how we will do that and get them nice and crisp and flat. So I'm going to set that aside right now and pull out this card right here that says Happy Mother's Day. It could be Happy Father's Day, and maybe you would want to choose something like pine cones or baseballs and bats and whatever your father really loves. Maybe flowers are perfect. Maybe he loves geraniums or roses, so you would want to make a wreath of roses for your father. So it's all making cards is also a process of being thoughtful about that other person that you're making the card for and figuring out what they might like. So I'm going to just show you how I quickly made some of these elements that are in the wreath. So I'm going to show you first of all simply how to make this little wreath, or not wreath, rose, by making little C's. So I'm going to make a little C in that direction, a little C in that direction, and then a little bigger C around the outside, and then yet another C around the outside there, and maybe one more right here. You can see these nice marks that you do get. Sometimes that dry brush on the paper is perfect for if you're doing water or something and you want to see a little light speckled on the water, using that dry brush would work really well. But I don't really want that necessarily in this flower. But now I'm coming back with my wet brush and I'm going to wet some of the edges so that it runs a little bit and becomes softer and a little bit more expressive. Now these ones in the center look way too hard edged, so I'll do that with them as well. So wherever I touch water, the water in the paint will only go where it's wet. So when it hits the dry paper, it will stop. But there's a simple way to make that rose. Now let's make a simple tulip shape. Again, I guess I'll make the yellow tulip. So just kind of with my brush, make the shapes. And while it's nice and wet like that, I think I'll come back in with a little of another color and lay it in there and let it move around a little bit. Again, I'm going to dry my brush off and just encourage that or soften the edges just a little bit. There we go. Now, maybe we need a little tiny bud, a small one that hasn't quite opened yet. And I could drop more color in that if I wanted to. Also, we can make this kind of lavender sort of flower by just touching the brush to the paper. If you don't have very much experience with watercolor, you'll surely want to try to just play with your brush and see what kinds of patterns, what kinds of lines and marks you can make with your brush. So I'm just going to add a little of another color in there, maybe another small one over here. And so on. Also, these berry patterns are nice ones to include in the wreath. And you can imagine lots more flower shapes. They don't have to be real flowers. Now you can see I'm leaving a little speck of white on these berry shapes so that it's like a little bit of a highlight on there. Now if I lose all those whites and I wish I had a little bit of a sparkle of light or highlight, I could come back at the end and paint a little tiny bit of white acrylic paint on there, or gesso, or opaque watercolor, which is called gouache, to, after it's dry, just add that highlight back in there if I wanted to. So now for leaves, it's can just, again, you'll need to explore the marks that your brush can make. This might be a little bit on the light side, so let's darken it up a little bit. So I'm just, by pulling my brush, flattening my brush down, I can make that nice, graceful leaf shape. Or I can make, well, over for these guys, I might want to make some little lines, maybe more leaves on the side. So if I have, I kind of like this nice graceful end, so I'll make the leaves come from here. But the repetition of marks make very nice patterns. There's so many people these days that are doing surface pattern and then having their paintings actually turned into fabrics. There are websites where you can do that. So you add a little leaf to these guys. Maybe this one actually needs that kind of a leaf. So you can get your brush, once you've discovered how your brush works, you can make, again, these little guys might, it's a little bit wet yet, so I'll probably get a little bit of blending, but that's all right. None of that really bothers me. So there are some very simple ways to make the floral patterns that could be made into a wreath and then add some lettering on the inside. So I think we'll set these aside now over there. And the next thing we'll talk about is this particular card. So here is one, and here's another. And these are made simply from, first, just very randomly painting a page with horizontal or vertical lines. Here's vertical, here's horizontal, a colored border, anything, and let them, so you can see how the colors are running together, which always looks a little more interesting actually than having everything precisely done. And also, rather than painting over and over and over, let there be variation in the quality of the paint on the paper. Here you can see where a lot of water must have landed and it caused all that blooming to happen, which is really kind of nice. Then I came inside here and with a pencil I drew lines, and these can be very random too, however. Are you able to see these lines okay, I hope? So just randomly make these kinds of spaces. And then you can come back and write your words in here and make the tops and the letters reach from the top of the line to the bottom of the line. I like to do this in pencil because otherwise you will not always get your letters lined up the way you want. And sometimes you might even, if my word was going to be happy up here, I'd think Happy. Okay, the P, one of the first P would be the middle letter. So I might put the middle letter in first and then the other P, the Y, and the H and the A, making sure the letters are spanning the whole distance between these. And then coming back after I know that I have spaced the letters the way I want them spaced and I've spelled them correctly, then I can come back with pen and pen over it and then erase all of the pencil lines that I had there. And of course your paint is dry at this point. You never want to put these pens on a wet painted surface. It will ruin the pen immediately. And the letters can be drawn just like anything else can be drawn. Have fun just drawing an interesting shape of a letter. There can be bubble letters. I have sometimes been trying to, let me show you a couple more of these things. This one, it looks like there was a little bit of space between the words, and this one you can see the words, the letters went right up to the same lines, and then there's this one also. It can be really fun and a bit playful and useful for any occasion. But another way, sometimes just simply scrawling a letter, your signature out. If you practice your lettering just a few days, tell me, Robert, what you're thinking.
Just move that out of the way a little bit. Move your page up.
Okay, there we go. Thanks. That's helpful. You know, they're not really filmmakers, so. All right, sometimes I've lately been just using my penmanship and kind of dragging it out in a nice way.
Pull back just a little.
I can't at this minute.
Yeah.
Okay. Sort of scrawling, letting it push out. I want to show you one quick thing that you could start practicing. If you practice it like maybe 10 minutes a day, you'll get to be better and better at it. And that is, a student taught me this, with the cheapest markers. They are the markers that work the best. These simple Crayola or whatever brand cheaper marker. To push hard on the downstroke and light on the upstroke. So to do happy, I would be light, hard, light, light, hard, light, hard, light. And as can practice that. It's kind of hard to do it and talk at the same time. But it's a really beautiful, it makes just a really simple, nice calligraphy. Just remember, light on the upstroke and heavy and hard on the downstroke. If you're finding that it's hard to do that way, you can do it with a pen. But with a small pen like this, I wouldn't make it very big. And then I sometimes find a better, like a fine Sharpie. And you can come back with your fine Sharpie and darken the downstrokes like this. And so it's a little bit of a cheating way of getting the same nice effect. That variety of thick and thin is always interesting to our eye. So that's just a thought about something you might want to practice as you make cards and add some lettering to the cards. Now then, the last thing we're going to do right now is color some paper so that it can start to dry, and we will weave the colored paper together soon. So I'm going to take a couple pieces. Actually, we aren't going to need that much, so I think I'll just tear this down. We'll take, well, maybe fold it in half would be good, and tear it in half. And I'm going to paint these two different colors. So, and I am going to wet the paper first. This is a little bit of a different, another paper, watercolor, also watercolor paper, but it's more absorbent, so we'll see how it works for this. Let's make this one, let's use the beautiful quinacridone gold, which can also be a burnt sienna is very similar to this color. So I'm just, and I like that it not have the exact same quality over the whole piece. So I like that there's some dark places, light places. And so we'll let that one dry now. And we'll paint another one. Again, let's quickly, if I had a little bigger brush, it could go faster, but sometimes we make do with what we have. Often we do. There we go. I want it to be pretty wet, but as I said, this paper is quite absorbent, so I'm really adding a lot of water. There we go. And I think a blue would be nice with that, so I'm going to put a little couple blues on here. Let's add a little more of that cobalt blue. Nice. There we go. Just with abandon, put some color on there. All right then, so we're going to let this set aside and dry. And we'll just take a moment to refocus things a little bit and come back, and then we will make a few cards that have a little bit more dimension to them. See you in a minute. Well, hi again. We will continue from where we left off. And when we last stopped, we had just painted the paper that we are going to use to make a little weaving out of. And before that, we learned a little bit about ink and watercolor and had a few ideas about lettering. And so now we're going to move into these cards with a little more dimension to them, and then followed by the actual assemblage of these pieces into cards and some envelope making. All right, so we have here the brown paper and the blue paper that we made, and just for a timeliness, we will use the paper cutter to cut them. I could use the scissors, but that would take a little bit longer, so let's just go ahead and, oops, see how this paper will cut on this little paper cutter of mine. So I want to cut those papers into strips. Maybe I better just do one at a time. This is a pretty old paper cutter. Wow. I know my mom got it at a garage sale. I don't think it's even going to work. Well, we'll have to resort. For this paper, it's not working well at all. So we'll just have to use the scissors after all. Oh well. We can be flexible. This is paper that's almost like rag. It's not a real hard paper. It's a soft watercolor paper. And now I have found that to weave this, so I'm going to put all the blue ones down first. Just going to make a little bit of small weaving. I don't need it to be that big, so I think I'll just cut these in half. The reason I want to show this to you is just for you to see how I like to get it started, because the beginning of weaving is always the hardest part until everything is sort of attached together. So I like to take a piece of tape and tape it down. Then I can weave it without trying to hold everything together. It will stay together by itself. So of course weaving is where you go under, over, under, over, under, over, and then push it up. Just for a little lesson, this is our warp, and these are our weft pieces that we're weaving in. So we could make this any size we wanted to. And you might have old paintings around that you could cut up and weave together. And in fact, I did that once with two paintings. They were still lifes. And it was really a fun thing to weave them together and keeping the pieces in order, but seeing the juxtaposition of the two different paintings woven together. Okay, so that didn't take long. And I have made my hole a little bit too big on this for this particular weaving, but I took and poked the scissors in this cardstock, piece of cardstock, and then cut around just into a simple heart shape. So then I will be able to pull this weaving up and fasten that behind the picture. So that's exactly what I've done here with this weaving of the green and pink watercolor paper. And then after I glued the weaving to the back, I took another piece of cardstock and glued it onto that. So here you can see this one has the weaving in the back, and then I can take another piece of cardstock and glue it on top of that so that it's completely hidden from sight. This one I cut the silhouette of a little fish out and put the weaving behind it. Now if you don't want to paint watercolor paper, you can just use pieces of magazine pages. And here are two different patterns of flowers from a seed catalog, and they're woven together. And here is another. And then on this one I wrote, "A loving heart is the truest wisdom" by Charles Dickens. So it's a nice, you can add any amount of embellishment or decoration on the outside, and even some quotations. This, by the time you do the weaving and you put the cardstock on it, on this beginning piece of cardstock, your card is finished. Sturdy and flat and ready to be mailed or written upon and then mailed. So we'll set all of this stuff out of the way and have a look at another possibility. All right, so the next thing we're going to have a look at is making a super simple type of card that uses fabric. These days, so many fabrics come in with a lot of imagery on them. Nice pictures of things, of all these lighthouses and other things. Well, what I have done is take the fabric, iron on some of this heat and bond fusible web, and so that the shiny stuff has been attached. The directions come with heat and bond. You can ask at any fabric store for this sort of material. Then you just simply iron it onto your fabric, and then you can cut it into shapes and iron it onto your cards. This is a great thing for kids to do too. Here are an assortment of very old cards that I found from years ago when our daughter was doing this with her friends as just a little girl, actually. So I've prepared this little pile of fabric here with heat and bond on the back, so all of these pieces can be cut out. And today we'll make a card with these pretty butterflies. So I have this piece of fabric that I put the heat and bond on, and now I cut it out, and I cut some of these empty spaces out too. And now I need to decide where on this card I'd like it to be. Well, maybe I'll just put it there. But I think what I would do is probably want to cut out another butterfly to put over here or something like that. But for right now at this, oh, what do I have here? This might work. Oh, that might work just nicely like that. All right, so I'm going to make my little ironing board with this towel. And I think I'll do one at a time. I simply lay that down with the shiny side of the heat and bond down against the paper and run the iron over it, and the fabric attaches itself. So let's see about putting this little butterfly on there also. There we go. Nice. Now, one can make these cards to be simply this fabric on there, or one could embellish them with other pen marks and lines. So I kind of made like stitching marks on here. One could even sew on the paper if you wanted to. You could and then I made a little mark on the back. Well, this one I thought would be fun with these frogs. Could put them hopping, maybe just a couple of them. And I thought I would draw some water lilies, lily pads underneath them. So I'll then get out my pens, paints, or colored pencils or crayons and make some lily pads for these frogs to be hopping over. So since we're here right now, I think I'll just take a moment and also iron that one on so he doesn't get lost. I'll do another frog card. So that's all there is to this. Simple, simple, easy idea, but a lot of fun and something that your children might like to do along with you. And then now these have envelopes, commercial envelopes I see, but I also then cut out little pieces of fabric to add to the envelope in the back of the envelope as well. So they all match. And then you can make a bundle of cards and envelopes and tie them up with a ribbon or a piece of raffia, and they make a nice little present for somebody also. A collection of note cards. So that's that idea. I'm going to set my iron back over here and unplug it. And now let's have a quick look at this pop-up card. So these are little watercolor flowers that I cut out of some scrap watercolor paper and glued onto the cover. And then when it opens up, there's this whole bouquet of flowers for your mother or father or whomever. And all of these flowers were just cut, and leaves were cut from scraps of watercolor paper also. Now let me quickly show you how to make that pop-up. You find a piece of paper here. And I like, lots of times I make my cards exactly half the size of a sheet of 8 by 11. Yep, 8, I think it's 8 or 8.5. Yep, 8.5 by 11. It's a standard typing paper, printing paper size. And when you cut that in half here at the 5.5 inch mark, half of 11, maybe we're going to have to sharpen my, there we go. It makes a very nice note card size, and it fits into a very standard envelope as well. So to make this pop-up card, you need one whole sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11, and then one of the halves gets cut. And I like to do it kind of at the center, either at the center of this side of the fold. So this is the fold and this is the open side. So a little bit below center, I will cut the shape like that. And then I'm going to fold it over so that the bottom of it is just a little bit above the bottom of the fold. And then when I open this up, what I need to do is press that, refold the center of that heart shape that I cut out so that it is folding in the opposite direction than it was. So now it's folded so that it opens like that instead. So you just reverse the fold right here, and then you get a card that opens like that. And then this will get slipped into here. It's an old piece of paper that has some other marks on it. And then what I do is I don't put the glue on this side. I put the glue back here everywhere except where this shape is that's going to come forward. We want the vase to be showing or to be free to fold out. So then we glue it together like so, and then just cut out from scrap paper flowers that you've made. You could draw flowers right on the back part and then have a few flowers just glued to the center part that's going to open up. So you can see now how this vase, pop-up vase, works. Like so. There's that idea. Now one more card idea here, and that is something I've seen for a long time, and I recently put one together. It's a little sandwich card. So here's a delicious vegetarian alfalfa sprout, tomato, Swiss cheese, avocado card. So, and on all of these pages, I can write clever little things, something about the sandwich for the person that I'm sending this nice little vegetarian sandwich to. Maybe if it's a burger and it has a round bun out here rather than this slice of bread. And you could make some clever little sayings up about the different editions of this, or the different elements for the sandwich. And so there's room for writing any kind of little story, context on each of the pages. These are the alfalfa sprouts and then the tomato. And for each of these, it has the same design on both sides of the card. Now I have one that's not sewn together yet, and I guess I was thinking that I would quickly show you. So here's a red onion. This one is again for my husband's mom, who loves a good fresh tomato and onion sandwich. So I would be painting this red onion, probably painting a lot of circles on here. And then if I want to soften some of the edges, as you can see I did, I think I won't finish this painting though, because I want to show you how to sew it together, and if it's all wet it's going to be difficult to do that. Even that's pretty wet. But let's give it a try. So I would finish painting this red onion, finish painting the other side of the tomato. But for now I'm just going to dry it off. This particular sandwich doesn't have a lot of ingredients. This one had it had cheese, avocado, alfalfa sprouts, and tomato. And this one only has tomato and onion. So I would then layer up the sandwich the way I would want it to be and cut myself a piece of thread. And it doesn't have to be a very long thread because we have only this much of a binding to sew on. But I will use what is called a signature binding or a pamphlet binding. I'll need a little extra just because I need it to wield the needle for even for such a small piece. So I'm going to first thread my needle, and I'll show you this little stitch. So I get everything lined up where I want it to be. Kind of want the onion in the middle of the bread. If I sew from the outside, it'll get tied on the outside. If I start sewing from the inside, it'll tie on the inside, and the knot and the threads will be inside the book, which is how I generally do it. But I was a little bit tempted to do this from the outside so that it would tie out here. Maybe we'll do that this time, and I'll tell you what I might do with it. So I'm sewing, actually I do have my awl here. I should make my holes. So I made one hole. I'm making 3 holes. Usually I make the center hole first and then 2 holes near the ends. But this is just such a short little binding, doesn't really matter. So what I'm going to do then is sew into the middle hole, and I'm going to hold that thread with my thumb while I go to one of the end holes and come back. Oh, but I wanted to remember, now it would have tied in here, but I decided this time I'm going to try having it tie on the outside. So I sew from the outside in the middle hole, come through one of the end holes, skip the middle hole and just go to the other end and back through. And then now I'll come through the middle hole. So we only come through the middle hole with the first stitch and the last stitch. So now I can pull that out, but I would like to make it a little bit more even. There we go. I can take my needle off. Now I have the skipped thread running straight across, and I want one thread on this side of that thread and one on this side, so that when I tie it, the knot won't go back right through the hole. That string will keep it in place. So then I tie a knot there, and the whole little book is sewn together. Now what I can do is I could tie a bow here, I could cut them off, but never cut your threads off right along with the knot. Leave a little bit of space so it can't work itself untied very easily. But another fun thing to do, I could make a little paper olive and hang the olive from this thread, maybe one from each thread at different heights. So maybe one olive hanging here and one olive hanging here, or just one olive from both of them. That would work too. So I would then tie the olive to the strings, which would be nice for Robert's mom, because she just told us the other day she could eat a whole can of olives at one sitting. So she ought to have olives with this sandwich. All right, I think that's a really fun little card. So we'll take a pause now and prepare for assembling the cards and making envelopes. Hi again, everybody. So now we're going to assemble these pieces into cards and also learn how to make a very simple envelope to mail them in. All right then, so Robert thought it might be a good idea for me to just elaborate one more time about how I sewed this pamphlet stitch, this signature stitch, in this book. And you can use this stitch to make all kinds of folded paper books. So I made 3 little holes, and then on this one, my needle went through the center hole. It came out, and I brought it out one of the end holes, skipped the middle hole, and crossed over to the other end hole, and went back in, and then I came back through the middle hole. So I am only going through the center hole on the first stitch and the last stitch. And then I want 1 thread on each side of that skipped thread so that when I tie it, the knot won't pop through. It will stay there and hold this book securely together. So that's that stitch. Now what I think we will do is make an envelope for this sandwich card or sandwich book. And I sometimes, old calendars are terrific for making envelopes because the paper is pretty sturdy, though it's not imperative that you have that sturdy paper, but old calendars are great for these envelopes, as are old maps. Here's an old Wisconsin map, which would also make a super nice envelope. Or you can just use inexpensive drawing paper as well. Here's an envelope that was made from a National Geographic page. Oops, it's not been glued together, I see. But this is what the template will look like, more or less. And when we sew these or glue these tabs down, we'll have an envelope. So here, I decided though, for this little sandwich book card, it would be nice to use a page from an old seed catalog. So this, I would choose for this one either the tomatoes or the onions. But I thought I'd go with the onions. So I'm going to tear the onion page out. And then I'm going to lay my card on, just wrap the page around it, probably give it a little bit of extra room when I fold it, so I'm not folding it tight, tight, tight up to the edge, but leave a little bit of room. So now then, I have, but I do, oh yeah, I want the onions, not the peppers, so that's perfect. Onions are on the outside. So now I usually do this in the simplest way by holding my card on the folded paper, and I just cut pieces. You can all just follow along with what you're seeing here. So you can see I've cut, this will be the flap that gets folded down eventually, and these 2 edges will become the tabs. So what I need to do here is cut this side of the tab off, and also this other side. Now you can see I'm also going to cut this edge of the top off because we don't need that. You can see that this seed catalog is a much flimsier paper, but it will be fine for an envelope. It really will work out just fine. So I'm going to set this seed catalog aside, and I can take the card off of there now. I know the sizing that I need, and I'm folding the tabs over, and then I'll glue them. Now, many people like using glue sticks, and if this doesn't have to last very long, a glue stick will be fine. And there are some good quality glue sticks, but I'm not really used to using glue sticks. I've always loved using Yes Paste, and so that's what I'm using here. Yes Paste has no toxic fumes, it's archival, it lays flat, it doesn't warp. I really recommend it. So there we go, glue the tabs down. And now my little card will slip right into the envelope, hopefully. There we go. And we can fold this down. And then this will need a dab of glue or a sticker or something to hold it closed. This is fairly light in color, but even this, it's to make it easier for the postmaster. One would like to glue a little address label onto the front. So I would probably glue that right on there on which to write the address so that it's easy for the postmaster to see it. Though I have seen some go through the mail even, but it depends. Like this one would be super dark and hard to see over, so again you would want to paste a little, or if you have some labels, those are handy, just stick a label on there and put the address on. Okay, so that's making the envelope, but we haven't actually made the cards yet. So for that, we need to have a piece of cardstock. So this is a card that was drawn with crayons and then painted over with a watercolor paint so that wherever the crayon was, the paint was resisted by the crayons. So it's just a fun technique, often done with children also, where they might color a picture and then paint over the whole thing with watercolor. And the watercolor will fill up the page wherever there is no crayon mark. All of these cards that I've made are different sizes, so you need to have cardstock that's large enough to fit your card. And what I'm going to do here, I think I will glue this down onto another sheet of paper just to give it a little border on the card. It's not necessary, but it's another variation like this one. Now this one has torn edges, which is nice, but the one I'm doing now will not have torn edges. This one has no framing on it. This one has a little bit of framing, but it's just an ink line that was drawn around it. Just another possibility as you assemble your cards. Many people like to use a brush when they're using Yes Paste. I tend to just use my finger. So now we'll glue it down onto this colored paper just for a little bit of framing. I'm just rinsing my finger off in my paint water since it's not too dirty. Now, this blue paper that I'm working with has been rolled up, so it's a little bit curled. So we'll work a little quickly here, and oh, I better bring my paper cutter over. I don't know if that's in your view or not. There we go. Now we have a little blue frame around this card. And now we would put this card onto the cardstock and fold it over, giving it yet another little white frame around the edge. Okay, nothing's quite straight, but that's also a little bit charming and will be just fine. So I'm going to cut this down to size. You know, you can do all of this with scissors if you don't happen to have a paper cutter. So now we'll glue that on. And again, this will take a little while to dry. Another great tip, and has been a miracle product, I think, is waxed paper. So I could take a piece of waxed paper and put this card between two pieces of waxed paper, and then just in case a little bit of glue seeps out, it's not going to stick to the wrong thing because the wax paper won't stick to it and helps it stay in place while it dries. So there we go, our final piece. So there. Now what I would do is put this card under some pressure, under some weight. So I will put it over here behind. I'm just going to put it aside and put a heavy book on top of it. Books make great weights for pressing these things together. And then tomorrow morning, I'll leave it there for a few hours or overnight. And when I open it up, the card's going to be perfectly flat, perfectly crisp and tight and beautiful, ready to put in its envelope and mail away. All right then. So I think we've covered just about all of these ideas. And so that's it for this little card making workshop. We hope some of you will put a little into practice for Mother's Day coming up soon, and then Father's Day shortly after that. We hope you have found a little inspiration and have some meaningful time thinking about your family and friends as you make cards for them. Bye for now.